Greetings. This video is for MA 110 College Algebra and factoring quadratics. I like to factor quadratics by using what's known as the AC method. And the reason it's called the AC method is if you remember a quadratic, we write it in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And so this a and c play an important part, so therefore it got called the AC method. Let's look at a specific example and I will walk you through the steps that I use. So 6x squared plus x minus 2. And we want to factor that quadratic. I also want to mention at this point that not all quadratics factor nicely. Some have radicals in them. Some may be imaginary numbers in them. So sometimes we have to be a little bit careful. But when we're asked to factor a quadratic as a matter of practice, it's usually something that can be factored quite easily. So let's look at this method. What I do over on the side of my paper is draw two lines and I put a multiplication symbol in them, and then that's equal. And then I draw two lines with an addition symbol and write equal. And what I want to do is find two numbers that when I multiply them together give me a times c. That's where the method AC method comes from. But when I add them together, I get b. So I need two numbers that when I multiply them together, I get a times c. So in this case, 6 times negative 2. So 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. But when I add them together, I get b, which in this case is equal to positive 1. So this is equal to negative 12, and this is equal to positive 1. So I need two numbers to multiply together to give me negative 12, but add together to give me positive 1. So if you can't think of those numbers right away, the nice thing about this method is you can just write negative 12 and then write all the factors of negative 12. I get negative 1 times 12, and I get negative 2 times 6, and I get negative 3 times 4. And it's pretty easy to see that, well, negative 3 times 4, when I add those two together, if I added these, I would get 1. So then I go, oh, well, this must be what I need. So I need the same two numbers to add together to give me 1 as that multiply together to give me negative 12. So I write negative 3 here and 4, and I write negative 3 here and 4. Once again, whatever number I put needs to be the same. So now what I do is take my 6x squared plus x minus 2, and I rewrite that in a special way. I recopy the first term, 6x squared, and then I add however I wrote the b here, because this is x 1 times x, and this is negative 3 times x plus 4 times x is the same as 1 times x. So this is negative 3 times x plus 4 times x. And that equals positive 1x minus 2. So I've just rewritten this term by taking the middle part and rewriting it as negative 3x plus 4x, which is the same as positive 1x. And then what I want to do is group together the first two terms and the second two terms. So 6x squared minus 3x plus 4x minus 2. Now I also want to point out that I chose the order of these carefully because I noticed that negative 3 and 6 have a common denominator and 4 and negative 2 have a common denominator. If I'd have written them the other way around, the 4 and the 6 have something in common, but the negative 3 and the negative 2, that would have been harder to factor. But that's okay, there's only two ways to write it, right? So if you don't put it in the easy order the first time and you can't get things to factor, just flip them around. And with a little practice, it's no problem. So All I need to do now then is factor out what's in common in these first two terms. So what's in common in those first two terms? Well, a 3x. And if I factor out a 3x, I get 2x minus 1. Then I'm going to factor out what's in common in the second two terms. What's in common in the second two terms? A 2. And I want to factor out something that when I factor out, I get what's left over from the first one. So yes, I could have factored out a negative 2 out of here. But if I factored out a negative 2, I wouldn't have the same thing that was here. So I want to factor out something from that second term that's going to leave me the same. I want those to be the same. So then I factor out that term, 2x minus 1. And when I factor out 2x minus 1, I'm left with 3x. So times 3x plus from here. And then what's left over when I factor out the 2x minus 1 plus 2. So I factored this, and it left me with 2. So then I'm done. That's it. So 6x squared plus x minus 2 is exactly the same thing as 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2. Okay, let's do another example. Same exact idea. I'm going to do the same steps. So this time I'm going to do 5x squared plus 14x minus 3. And I need to factor that. So what I'm going to do is write something times something equals a times c. A times c is 5 times negative 3, so that's negative 15. And those same two somethings added together need to give me 14. Okay, so what numbers could I put there? Well, if I put a 1 and a 15, I multiply 1 times 15, I get 15. But I don't want 15, I want negative 15, and I also need a positive 14. So if I make this 1 and negative, then I have what I need. Perfect. So now all I need to do is rewrite this. So 5x squared, and then plus negative x plus 15x minus 3. So I wrote 14x as negative x plus 15x. Negative x plus 15x. And then I just group them. So the first two terms are 5x squared minus x. And the second one is plus 15x minus 3. So what can I factor out of those first two terms? I'm going to factor out an x. And when I factor out an x, I'm left with 5x minus 1. And what can I factor out of the second term? I can factor out a 3. And when I factor out a 3, I get 5x minus 1. Perfect. So then 5x minus 1. And what's left over? X plus 3. So using the AC method is a quick shortcut method to help us organize our thoughts when we're trying to factor things without a leading coefficient of 1. Okay, let's look at one last example. So I have this 5x squared minus 50x minus 120. And that's the thing we're going to be asked to factor. Now, I could use the same exact method that I've been using before. There'd be nothing wrong with what we've done. But one thing I can do is do a little bit of work ahead of time to make it easier for me. I notice that each term has a 5 factor in it. So I can factor out a 5. So I get x squared minus 10x minus 24. Because 5 times 24 is 120. So then what I'm going to do is just factor what's in here, and when I'm finished, multiply by 5. Now, notice that this is a leading coefficient of 1, so you could use a different method than what we've been doing here in the AC method, but I'm going to still do it exactly the same way. I'm going to use that AC method. So I'm going to do x squared minus 10x minus 24, and I need two numbers that multiply together to give me negative 24. But when I add those same two numbers together, I get negative 10. And then don't forget, whenever I finish this, I have to remember to multiply by 5 because I factored out the 5. But I'm just working with the inside right now. So I'm going to put down 2 times 12. 2 times 12 makes 24. And if I make this one negative, the 12 negative, I get negative 24. And then 2 plus negative 12, that indeed is negative 10. So I think I'm in business. So then I write down x squared plus. And now I'm going to write this negative 10 as 2 plus negative 12. So negative 10 is 2x plus negative 12x, and then still minus 24. So x squared I recopied, plus, and then I write negative 10x as 2x and negative 12x. All right, so now I just regroup things. So x squared plus 2x, and then plus negative 12x minus 24. And this is a sort of a weird notation to having this positive right next to that negative. That's kind of weird. So I'm just going to put those second ones in brackets. Okay, so the first one I can factor out an x, and when I factor out an x, I'm left with x plus 2. And the second one, I can factor out something. Let's factor out a negative 12. And when I'm left, I have x plus 2. And still, it's kind of weird. I have this positive next to that negative. That's kind of weird. So I'm just going to write a parentheses again, so that's not weird. And then I have an x plus 2 in common. And what's left over? Well, an x and a negative 12. So I factored out the x plus 2. And what was left over? X and then minus 12. Okay, so then that's finished, except for I just need to remember to multiply by 5. So my 5x squared minus 50x minus 120 is factored as 5 times x plus 2 times x minus 12. Okay, I hope this video helped. Let me know if you need any more help, and I'd be happy to help.